Shalom Hadavarniks. Welcome to our next session in Messiah and the Tabernacle. We're in session 14, and we're going through Exodus chapter 29. So let's review where we were last session. Last session, we were in chapter 28, and we finished that chapter up by looking at the clothes that the priests and the Levites would be dressed in as they perform their official duties in the tabernacle. Then we moved into chapter 29, which is the consecration ceremony itself, the preparation of the priests for their ministry. Now, the chapter began by saying that Aaron and his sons should bring 3 animals forward, a young bull and 2 rams. These will be the sacrificial animals for the consecration ceremony. And 3 types of bread products were also brought forward. One of them is this matzah. And the bread products, and the high priest, by the way, were all anointed with oil in the shape of the Greek letter chi, says the rabbis. Now, I don't know why the rabbis would choose the Greek letter chi to say the high priest and the bread were anointed. And we examined that, and I felt that God may be giving us a little message here that through the key, because the key is the first letter of the Greek word Christos, and Christos is the Greek translation of the word Messiah. So I'm thinking that maybe God is just trying to give us a little hint forward that Jesus would be the bread of life, the Messiah would be the bread of life, and the Messiah would also be the high priest. That's my supposition. I'll leave it up to you to decide whether I'm right or not. Maybe the Lord will chastise me for that, but I really do think he's hinting at something here. Because there are plenty of letters to choose from in the Hebrew alphabet. Why didn't the rabbis choose the letter Aleph? Or why didn't Moses choose the letter Aleph? You know, it looks kind of like an X as well. It could mark high priest and the bread just as well. So again, I think we might be getting a message that the Messiah is the bread of life, and the Messiah is the high priest. All right, then the high priest was dressed in his garments. Moses dressed Aaron in the white tunic, and then he put on his blue robe over the white tunic, followed by the multicolored ephod, and the breastpiece to be held firmly to his chest, the band of the ephod, the belt of the ephod, the turban, and also the holy crown. So Aaron is now fully dressed in his magnificent garb. Then his sons were also dressed in their priest's assistant's garb, or their Levitical garb. They were dressed in their white tunic, and followed by the sash around the waist and the cap on the head. So now Aaron and his sons are fully garbed and identified as Israel's priests and ready to be consecrated for their ministry. So the young bull is brought forward and sacrificed. Before it's sacrificed, the worshipers, Aaron and his sons, leaned on the head of the sacrifice. They put their hands on the head of the bull and leaned all their weight on the bull. This is a symbol of identification and substitution. This animal is my substitute. It's bearing the weight of my sin. Then the animal's jugular vein is cut with a razor knife. Again, this is a merciful way to kill the animal, because the animal probably just experienced a complete sudden blackout. When the jugular vein was cut, the blood pressure to the brain stopped, and so the animal probably just experienced the lights out, and that's it, no pain. Well, then the heart would beat for a little while longer, and the blood would be pumped out of the jugular vein and be caught in the mitzvah. The priest would then go over to the altar, and he'd pour the blood from the mitzvah out on the base of the altar, identifying the sacrifice with the place of atonement, a place of judgment, I should say. The blood of the animal is poured out. The animal has died at the place of judgment in place of the sinner. Then the best parts of the animal were burned on the altar. The fat was burned on the altar. The other parts of the animal that were not valuable were then burned outside the camp. And that is a big picture of Yeshua because he also suffered outside the camp. This is picked up and explained as prefiguring Yeshua. Now, this is Jerusalem in the first century. This is the second city wall in the first century. And you can see the Golgotha is outside the city, outside the camp. That's where Jesus suffered. All right, that brings us to the new material. We're now going to take a look at the burnt offering, and this is in Exodus. We begin in Exodus 25, verses 15 through 18. So let's start with the three emphasis of these verses in verses 15 and 16. You shall also take the one ram, and Aaron and his sons shall lay their hands on the head of the ram, and you shall slaughter the ram, and you shall take its blood and sprinkle it around on the altar. So the ram is brought forward, and there's, again, three emphasis here. Three ideas inherent in the idea of bringing your sacrifice. First of all, it's an expression of devotion. You're willing to please God. You're willing to obey. Secondly, it's an expression of commitment. You will obey even if it hurts. You will obey even if you have to give up this fine animal of yours, this perfect ram. Unblemished ram. And then it's the third idea is complete surrender to God. You know, God comes first, self comes second. We will do this as I've surrendered my life to God. Now, this is not asceticism, and this is not monkish self-denial. This is simply putting God first in your life. Okay, then there comes the laying on of hands on the ram. And when Aaron and his sons laid their hands on the ram, they leaned their entire weight on the head of the animal. And again, a symbol of substitution, saying that this animal is my substitute. This animal receives punishment in my place. He's my substitute. And then there's the idea of identification. This animal is bearing the weight of my sins, my sins. The animal is then mercifully slaughtered, and there's an application of blood to the altar. Now, this is different from the sin offering. There, the blood was poured out at the base of the altar. Here, the blood is thrown against opposing corners, and we're applying the blood. Here, you can see the blood is falling on two sides of the altar. Then, if you went kitty corner and splashed the blood on the corner, the blood would be on the other two sides of the altar. So the idea here is that it fell on all four sides, and so there's a complete and total identification of the substitute with the place of judgment. The substitute has died, it's poured out its blood here at the place of judgment, rather than the sinner himself. All right, let's move on to verse 17. Then you shall cut the ram into its pieces, and wash its entrails and its legs, and put them with its pieces and its head. So the ram is dismembered, the inward parts are washed and processed. Now here's an illustration of processing the sacrifice. You can see the Levite on the right side is doing that job with his knife. Here's another illustration of processing the sacrifice. That body is quite large on the table there, so that is probably a bull, and he has the head of a goat in his hands. So the inward parts are processed and washed, signifying cleansing from sin. And then in verse 18, they are burned. Then you shall offer up in smoke the whole ram on the altar. It is a burnt offering to the Lord. It is a soothing aroma, an offering by fire to the Lord. And so the entire ram is burned upon the altar. Here you can see three Levites, and they're getting ready to toss the pieces of the ram, the dismembered and washed pieces of the ram, onto that hot altar. They couldn't get too close because the fire was so hot. So they had to do a little bit of a toss to get the pieces onto the flames itself. So the entire ram is burned on the altar. It's given up to God. So this is an expression of total devotion, commitment, and complete surrender to God. Now the sacrifice is then described as a soothing odor or a soothing aroma, a pleasing aroma. The idea here is that a commitment of a person's whole life to God is very soothing, very satisfying to the Lord. It teaches us about the satisfaction that He feels when someone loves Him fervently. See, this is a soothing aroma to God. So you see, most of His beloved creation rejects Him. You know, God created all of us over all these years. He loves every one of us deeply and fervently, but the vast majority of people thumb their noses at Him. You know, and so when someone places their faith in Him and says, I want to follow you and love you, that is very, very soothing and pleasing to God. Now, we can understand this idea of a soothing aroma, a pleasing aroma, on a couple of levels. First of all, let's try the feminine level with the ladies. The ladies would probably identify with this by smelling perfume or flowers. Here she's smelling the sweet fragrance of that flower, and it's very pleasing to her soul. And when she does that, that's what's happening in God's soul. He's a person like you and I, and He is soothed and pleased. Now, for the guys, I think it would be a different level and a little different for the guys. Let's take a look at it from this point of view of a barbecue. Guys probably would like the smell of a barbecue. So when you're in your backyard this summer and somebody's barbecuing something nearby and that beautiful aroma drifts into your yard, and you sniff it, that smells so good. I wish I was part of that barbecue. That's the satisfaction and soothing that God feels in His soul as well. So guys and gals, there's two levels of soothing aroma for you. Then let's return our attention to the first ram of the two. It functioned as a burnt offering, and the burnt offering speaks of devotion to God. Now we come to the consecration offering in verses 19 through 21. Very similar procedures. Verse 19. Then you shall take the other ram, and Aaron and his sons shall lay their hands on the head of the ram. So there's the laying on of hands. We're very familiar with that. Verse 20, the application of blood. You shall slaughter the ram and take some of its blood, and this is a bit different. You'll put it on the lobe of Aaron's right ear, and on the lobes of his sons' right ears, and on the thumbs of their right hands, and on the big toes of their right feet, and sprinkle the rest of the blood around on the altar. So this is very, very different, this application of blood for the consecration offering. It is smeared on the priest's right ear, right thumb, and right toe. Now, first of all, the right side. The right side is chosen because the right side is often associated with honor. It's associated with an oath. It's associated with fellowship and blessing and power. So it's the preferred side, the right side. For example, Psalm 110. Let me back that up here. Well, there we go, Psalm 110. A psalm of David. The Lord says to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet. So it's an example. The right side is the preferred side. But what about these places where the blood is applied? It's applied to the right ear, to the right thumb, and to the right big toe. Isn't that kind of weird or crazy? Why would you apply blood in those areas? Well, it's not weird or crazy, you guys. Two pictures are portrayed here. Number one, total consecration is emphasized. From head to foot, the whole man is set aside for God's service. From his head, his right ear, down to his right big toe. And Rabbi Hertz, in the Hertz Pentateuch, has a worthwhile comment to look at. Rabbi Hertz says, the ear was touched with the blood that it might be consecrated to hear the word of God. The hand to perform the duties conducted with the priesthood, and the foot to walk in the path of righteousness. In a kingdom of priests, the consecration of the ear, hand, and foot should be extended to every member of that kingdom. So very good comments here. So we have the ear anointed so we can listen to God, attentiveness. And then we have the right thumb anointed, speaking of our work for God, our deeds. And then the right big toe is anointed, speaking of our walk with God, our relationship. So I think this method of anointing here on the priest can teach us a lot. Well, I think a good personal application arises here under the question, how to walk with God. These priests are just commissioned to walk with God and to serve Him, be attentive to Him. Well, how do we do that? Well, I think we can get some insight by looking in the book of Ephesians. First of all, we need to walk in a worthy manner. Ephesians 4, 1 through 3. Therefore I, the prisoner of the Lord, implore you to walk in a manner worthy of the calling by which you've been called, with all humility and gentleness and patience. So the first three qualities of a worthy walk are to be humble, to be gentle, and to be patient with people. Then we move on. Showing tolerance for one another in love, and being diligent to preserve the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. And the last four qualities of a worthy walk: tolerance, love, unity, and peace. So there's one way to walk in a worthy manner. We can also walk in a new manner of life, Ephesians 4, 17 through 22. So this I say and affirm together with the Lord, so this is the Lord's command as well, that you walk no longer just as the Gentiles also walk, in the futility of their mind, being darkened in their understanding. So the old way to walk is a futile way, and you walk in the darkness because you don't understand where you're going. Also, if you're walking in that way, you are excluded from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them, because of the hardness of their heart, and they, having become callous, so here's some more qualities of the unworthy walk, the wrong kind of walk. You walk in a way that is not pleasing to God, you'll be excluded from the life of God because you're ignorant and hard. You're not soft and moldable and obedient to His way. You're callous. Having given themselves over to sensuality for the practice of every kind of impurity and with greediness. Another characteristic of the unworthy walk is sensuality. And boy, we see that in our culture today. For the practice of every kind of impurity. And I don't think you can find an impurity that's been overlooked in American society today. And not only is it sensuality and impurity, but it's with greediness. The men and women who practice sensuality and impurity want more and more and more and more and more. They're greedy for more. So that is the old manner of life. And now Paul goes on, but you did not learn Messiah in this way, if indeed you have heard Him and have been taught of Him. Just as truth is in Yeshua, that in reference to your former manner of life, you lay aside the old self, lay aside all that stuff we just read about, which is being corrupted in accordance with the lusts of deceit. Because that lifestyle is a corrupting lifestyle. And sin destroys itself. It's corrupting, it rusts itself, and eventually, like a piece of metal rusting through, it collapses. And it's all due to deceit. This is deceit. This is not the right way to go. You're being deceived if you think that this is a worthy way to go. So we're to walk in a new manner of life rather than in the old way of life. We're also to walk in love, Ephesians 5:2, and walk in love, just as Messiah also loved you and gave Himself up for us, an offering and a sacrifice to God as a fragrant aroma. So we are to give ourselves up to God by walking in love, just as Yeshua gave Himself up to us. We're to walk as children of light in Ephesians 5:8 and 9. For you were formerly darkness, see, that's the old way of life, but now you are light in the Lord. Walk as children of light. For the fruit of the light consists of, and here's character qualities of the walk of a child of light, goodness and righteousness and truth. Now you walk this way and the world's going to call you a goody-goody. Oh, you're just a goody-goody. You like to obey the rules. You're good and righteousness means to live by a standard of behavior. Oh, you're a goody-goody and you like to obey the rules. And you think you know the truth. Now my truth is as good as your truth. To them, truth is subjective. So you're going to endure that kind of attitudes from the world, from the children of darkness. But just endure them. They'll be well worth it when you walk into the kingdom of light. We're also to walk in wisdom. Therefore be careful how you walk, not as unwise men, but as wise, making the most of your time, because the days are evil. So there we walk in wisdom as well. God's wisdom derived from the Scriptures. Okay, well, let's get back to our consecration offering. After the blood is applied to the ear, thumb, and big toe, there's an application of blood to the four sides of the altar. Again, affirming the complete association of the substitutionary sacrifice with the place of judgment rather than the sinner. The substitute's blood, the substitute life has been given up, but not the sinner's, even though the wages of sin is death. The substitute experienced that death. Verse 21, then you shall take some of the blood that is on the altar and some of the anointing oil and sprinkle it on Aaron, on his garments, and on his sons, and on his sons' garments with him. So some blood from the altar is mixed with the anointing oil. Some of this blood mixed with the anointing oil. And this mixture is sprinkled on all the candidates. So he and his garments shall be consecrated, as well as his sons and his sons' garments with him. So the mixture is sprinkled on the priests and on their clothing. So here's the priests, and now I'm going to sprinkle some blood on their clothing, their blood and oil spattered garments. So this suggests empowerment by the Ruach HaKodesh. They would only be able to effectively serve if they yielded to the control and power of the Holy Spirit. So they're to administer the sacrificial system in the power of the Spirit. Now, the previous anointing focused on the person. Here, the anointing, and with this anointing, the official clothes are anointed, emphasizing the office, the official position. So the persons previously, the office here. Then we come to the wave offering in verses 22 through 25. This is the final offering. This gave the priests authority to administer the sacrifices. First of all, we look at the consecration ram, verse 22. You shall also take the fat from the ram, and the fat tail, and the fat that covers the entrails, and the lobe of the liver, and the 2 kidneys, and the fat that is on them, and the right thigh, for it is a ram of ordination. So what he's talking about here is a ram from the eastern fat-tailed sheep, and they have abundance of fat in their tails, big, huge tails that can get quite long. But the fat is considered the best part of the animal, and so it's taken out and gathered together. Then unleavened grain products are gathered. Verse 23, and 1 cake of bread, and 1 cake of bread mixed with oil, and 1 wafer from the basket of unleavened bread which is set before the Lord. So there's those 3 grain products gathered together. And these items fill the hands of Aaron and his sons in verse 24. And you shall put all of these in the hands of Aaron and the hands of his sons, and shall wave them as a wave offering before the Lord. So these items are waved before the Lord. Now, what is a wave offering? Well, in Rashi's view, the hands are moved horizontally in all directions, like so, okay? Then vertically up and down. This is how Rashi feels the wave offering was performed. The idea he feels here is that the elements of the earth, the provision for physical life, are offered to the God of heaven and earth who provided them. I think we should also recognize in this provision a symbol of thanksgiving as well. So this is an illustration of the high priest instructing this Jewish man on how to perform his wave offering. Verse 25, they are now placed on the altar. You shall take them from their hands. The priest will take the bread and the meat products from their hands and offer them up in smoke on the altar, on the burnt offering, for a soothing aroma before the Lord. It is an offering by fire to the Lord. So everything was waved, the meat and grain products, and it functioned as a burnt offering. It was placed on the burnt offering and consumed by the fire, speaking of devotion and complete surrender to God. Now, the provision for the priests, it comes to the fore in verses 26 through 35. This is a practical result of the ceremony. Let's pick it up in verse 26. Then you shall take the breast of Aaron's ram of ordination and wave it as a wave offering before the Lord, and it shall be your portion. So the breast of the ram is kept back, it's singled out. This is the only item not totally consumed in the fire, and it's received by the priests for their personal use as food. Now, why? Well, the priests had given over their entire being to God for His service. They were living sacrifices, so to speak. Consequently, God would supply their needs, their sustenance. And so the needs are provided from the very work that they perform, from the very sacrifices that they performed. The right thigh, for example, of the sacrifice. Now, the Apostle Paul brings this forward as a principle for today into the Brit Hadashah, and this is in 1 Corinthians 9, 13, and 14. Do you not know that those who perform sacred services eat the food of the temple, and those who attend regularly to the altar have their share from the altar? So we just looked at that a moment ago, didn't we? The priests received meat from the sacrifices. Now the application. So also the Lord directed those who proclaim the gospel to get their living from the gospel. You know, this is why we support pastors and missionaries in full-time service. They have given their lives over to full-time promotion of the gospel. Therefore, they should be supported by the gospel, by those who've already been saved. Now we come to the heave offering in verse 27. And this new offering is introduced. You shall consecrate the breast of the wave offering and the thigh of the heave offering, which was waved and which was offered from the ram of ordination, from the one which was for Aaron and from the one which was for his sons. So these offerings are heaved. Now, a heave offering apparently is just waving your hands up and down only. This is in contrast to the wave offering, where you waved your hands horizontally back and forth and then vertically up and down. And this offering probably consisted of the right thigh. We learn this from Leviticus 7:32. You shall give the right thigh to the priest as a contribution from the sacrifice of your peace offerings. So that could very well be the key. Now, I'm going to share with you an interesting comment by Houbegas on this subject. This is Charles Francis Houbegas, 1686 to 1783. He was a French Catholic biblical scholar. Now, his comment is recorded by Adam Clarke. The comment reads this way: the heave offering and wave offering, as two ceremonies in the same oblation, are here distinguished. The wave offering implies that the victim was moved hither and thither, to the right hand and to the left and right, and the heave offering was lifted up and down, and this was done several times. Now note, in this way the Jews, he says the Jews explain these things and teach the Christians that by these acts the cross was adumbrated, was foreshadowed, upon which that peace offering of the human race was lifted up, which was prefigured by all the ancient victims. Now, according to Houbegas, the Jews teach the Christians that the victims, the ancient animals that were sacrificed, prefigured the Messiah, who was the peace offering for the human race. Isn't that amazing? And what happens when you do a heave offering and a wave offering? Up and down, side to side. What have you formed there? You formed a cross. You formed a cross. Of course, that's what they're seeing. Up and down motion, side to side motion. Isn't that amazing? These, the Jews, explain that these acts of the wave and heave offering prefigure the Messiah. Who are these Jews? Rabbis? I find it hard to believe that rabbis would teach that. But I find it easy to believe that Jewish Christians would teach that. So I would bet he's talking about Jewish Christians there when he says the Jews explain it these ways. I don't think the rabbis would. Anyway, that's quite an explanation that Houbegas has experienced. All right, let's move on to the purpose in verse 28. It shall be for Aaron and his sons as their portion forever from the sons of Israel, for it is a heave offering, and it shall be a heave offering from the sons of Israel from the sacrifices of their peace offerings, even their heave offering to the Lord. So the offerings provided food for the priests. The priests were set apart for two reasons. First of all, to administer the divine services in the tabernacle, the sacrificial system. They were also set aside to teach Israel. And this is to teach Israel the law, the Bible. And both assignments are mentioned in Deuteronomy 33, verse 10. They shall teach your ordinances to Jacob and your law to Israel, and they shall put incense before you, and whole burnt offerings on your altar. So the first is their teaching ministry, and number 2 is their ministry in the tabernacle and temple. So the priests had no opportunity to earn a living in a conventional manner. They were supposed to be employed in ministry full time. So they were Israel's public school system, as well as ministering in the temple. So, and as a result, God provides for their day-to-day physical needs. So the peace offerings of the community would supply their food. The next issue to come forward is the issue of succession in verses 29 and 30. The holy garments of Aaron shall be for his sons after him, in that in them they may be anointed and ordained. For 7 days the one of his sons who is priest in his stead shall put them on when he enters the tent of meeting to minister in the holy place. So verses 29 and 30 deal with the issue, what happens after Aaron dies? So the ordination vestments of Aaron and his sons would be passed down from generation to generation. The future high priest would wear the vestments and will go to the consecration period, go through consecration. The consecration period is 7 days, and the number 7 is very prominent in the Bible. It speaks of wholeness and completion. So they will be wholly consecrated to God, completely set aside for God's service. Now, the issue of succession is often ignored, but we can't do that forever. We can't do that forever. We die, we retire, we get sick, whatever. And God does not ignore this issue in the life of Israel. He provides for the succession of the priests. And we should not ignore this issue either in our lives. Many people kind of do it. They kind of, well, I'll worry about that later, and later comes and they haven't done it. So we need to prepare our families and our businesses and our ministries for our succession when we retire or get sick or die. You know, we need to do that, just as God has here with the temple. The next subject on the agenda here is the consecration meal in verses 31 to 34. You shall take the ram of ordination and boil its flesh in a holy place. Aaron and his sons shall eat the flesh of the ram and the bread that is on the basket at the doorway of the tent of meeting. Thus they shall eat those things by which atonement was made at their ordination and consecration. But a layman shall not eat them, because they are holy. If any of the flesh of the ordination or any of the bread remains until morning, then you shall burn the remainder with fire. It shall not be eaten, because it is holy. Now, in ancient Near Eastern culture, meals were much more important than in our culture. Meals were not casual actions. You know, hospitality was a highly esteemed virtue. Guests were sacred. It was an honor to provide for a guest. So to eat with someone meant fellowship and acceptance and friendship. There was no such thing as a casual business lunch where you'd both sit down at the table, negotiate a contract, sign it, and leave. Nothing like that. And in addition, the host is responsible for the safety and welfare of his guests. And this is seen, for example, in Genesis 18, 1 through 8. Now the Lord appeared to him, that's Avram, by the oaks of Mamre, while he was sitting at the tent in the heat of the day, sitting at the tent door in the heat of the day. And when he looked up, when he lifted his eyes and looked, behold, 3 men were standing opposite him. So Abraham sees these 3 travelers. And when he saw them, he ran from the tent door to meet them and bowed himself to the earth and said, My Lord, if now I have found favor in your sight, please do not pass your servant by. So he's eager to run and humble himself before these travelers. Bowed himself to the earth. And then he proposes, please let a little water be brought to wash your feet and rest yourselves under the tree. And I will bring a piece of bread that you may refresh yourselves. After that you may go on, since you have visited your servant. So here he acts as a good host, and he proposes meeting their needs. And they said, so do, as you've said. They agree, we could use all that. So Abraham hurried into the tent of Sarah and said, quickly, prepare 3 measures of flour, knead it, and make bread cakes. So again, he's in a hurry. He doesn't want these visitors to suffer any kind of delay in getting their comfort and their needs met. So he gets his wife baking the bread. He also ran to the herd. He's not messing around here. And he took a tender and choice calf, and he gave it to the servant, and he hurried to prepare it. So it took a while to prepare it, of course. You had to kill the calf and skin it and get the meat ready and all that. So it took a while. But he all did it in a hurry to get it to the men as quickly as possible. He took curds and milk and the calf which he had prepared and placed it before them. And he was standing by them under the tree as they ate. So Abraham has lavishly provided for his guests. He treats them like kings. He humbly bows before them. He provides for their needs. He washes their feet. He provides for their hunger. He provides for shade and rest. And he served them as a servant, not as a master, but as a servant. Now, these principles are all present in Exodus chapter 29, the same principles in Genesis 18 there. And the meal was eaten at the doorway of the tabernacle. That's God's house. It was eaten at the tent of meeting. This is where God and man met. And the priests then represent Israel. They are the highly esteemed and honored guests. And God is committing himself to provide for Israel's safety and welfare in three ways. God is communicating three messages to Israel: that the nation is his friend, he loves the nation, that the nation is totally accepted by him, the sin issue has been dealt with, and he desires Israel's fellowship. There's only one exception to the meal. But a layman shall not eat them. The basic meaning, a non-priest will not be allowed to eat of this meal. Other translations render the phrase this way: but no one else may eat them, NIV. An outsider shall not eat them, RSV. But a stranger shall not eat them, ASV and King James Version. Now the word referred to is the word zur. It means to be a stranger, and the basic thought is you're not acquainted with these people. You're not related to these people. And the point here is that a proper relationship to God is necessary before you can partake of his meal. You have to be acquainted with him. You have to be related to him. Revelation 3:20, for example, behold, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come into him and will dine with him and he with me. Now, this is a church that we're talking about here. And Jesus just doesn't traipse on into the church. He knocks on and says, open the door, greet me, build a relationship with me, then I'll come in. He's not going to just walk in on people that don't want him, that aren't interested in him. So a consecrated relationship is based on trust. It's not based on words, it's not on riches, it's not on power, it's based on faith plus nothing. So we have to have that personal relationship with God. Now, the procedure for the consecration ceremony is brought out in verses 35 to 46. The duration and purification of the ceremony. First, the idea of obedience, however, comes to the fore in verse 35. Thus you shall do to Aaron and his sons according to all that I have commanded you. So consecration to God means obedience to his commands. Anything else is inconsistent at best or hypocrisy at worst. For example, Jesus says that over and over. If you love me, you'll keep my commandments. Obedience. John 14:21. He who has my commandments and keeps them is the one who loves me. John 15:10. If you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love. And we have to obey God. And this is the love of God, that we keep his commandments, and his commandments are not burdensome. So the commandments we keep today are the applicable imperatives in the New Testament. And the New Testament has various sections, and it is called the law of the Messiah. Romans 8:2, 1 Corinthians 9:21, Galatians 6:2. The New Testament is also the law of the Messiah, the law that is our rule of life today. So we are to obey, just as Israel was to obey. The idea of completeness comes forward in the second part of the verse. You shall ordain them through 7 days. So the ceremony lasted 7 days. And again, remember the number 7 carries the idea of completeness and emphasis and intensity as well. When the ceremony is over, these men will be utterly set apart for God's service as priests. The next step in the procedure is purification from sin in verse 36. Each day you shall offer a bull as a sin offering for atonement, and you shall purify the altar when you make atonement for it, and you shall anoint it and consecrate it. So this section deals with purification from sin, and the altar is consecrated. It has to be purified from sin, even though it's just an inanimate object. So God is constantly aware of the impurity and defilement of this world. And he is very different from this shattered world. He is absolutely holy. He is absolutely undefiled. And as a result, everything has to go through some sort of purification, whether it be ceremonial, which is symbolic, or actual, which is literal. And so the priests and Levites will experience a perfect and complete consecration in verse 37. For 7 days you shall make atonement for the altar and consecrate it. Then the altar shall be most holy, and whatever touches the altar shall be holy. So verse 37 speaks of a complete and perfect consecration. It was a 7-day procedure that satisfied God. And now the altar is set aside for sacred use. Then the offerings can be totally devoted. Now this was Yeshua's point in Matthew 23:19. You blind men, he said, which is more important, the offering or the altar that sanctifies the offering? Well, the altar is more important than the offering. And Yeshua was trying to make that point with these people. Now the offerings are discussed in verses 38 through 42, and they are called a tamid, a continual offering. First of all, we encounter the daily burnt offerings of the temple service in verses 38 to 41. Now, this is what you shall offer on the altar. 2 one-year-old lambs each day, continuously. The one lamb you shall offer in the morning, and the other lamb you shall offer at twilight. And there shall be 1/10 of an ephah of fine flour mixed with 1/4 of a hin of beaten oil, and 1/4 of a hin of wine for a drink offering, and for one lamb. The other lamb you shall offer at twilight, and you shall offer it with the same grain offering and the same drink offering as in the morning, for a soothing aroma, an offering by fire to the Lord. A soothing aroma again. Now here's an illustration of the daily burnt offering. Here we have the Levites taking the pieces of the offering that has been processed by that Levite on the right side. They have the pieces of the offering to take up to the altar. And then this is the flour and oil to be included with the offering. And then this is the wine offering, the drink offering to be included. So let's back up again to this daily burnt offering. Now the 2 lambs are offered. The word means a young ram. They're offered every day, one in the morning, one in the evening. The whole day then is associated with sacrifice, AM and PM, every day. They were accompanied with the grain offering of flour and oil, and with the drink offering of wine. Now, verse 42. These continual offerings are designated an olah in verse 42. It shall be a continual burnt offering throughout your generations at the door of the tent of meeting, before the Lord, where I will meet with you and speak with you there. So the word olah means ascending, to go up. From olah we get the term Holocaust. And that term Holocaust has been associated with World War II and the destruction and murder of 6 million European Jewry during World War II. The word comes from the Septuagint for whole burnt offering, Holocaust. So that's where that word comes from. And many Jews don't like that term Holocaust because it kind of implies that the murder of 6 million Jews was a whole burnt offering to the Lord. And so they prefer the term Shoah, which means disaster. So the sacrifice is ascending to God while being consumed by the flame. The whole sacrifice is consumed by the fire. Every part of a burnt offering was consumed by the flames, and speaking of complete dedication of the offers unto God. Now the daily offerings originated with the priest's installation service. And they continued on a daily basis from that time on. They were offered on behalf of the entire nation every day, morning and evening. And so God's desire for Israel is that they be completely dedicated to Him. And if they did, a great blessing would result. The blessings of the Mosaic covenant in Deuteronomy 28 and Leviticus 26. If they did not follow God and did not obey Him, the curses of the covenant would follow. Curses of the Mosaic covenant in Deuteronomy 28 and Leviticus 26. Keep those two chapters in mind. They contain the blessings and cursings of the covenant. So let's take a look at this idea of the blessings and cursings of the covenant. Here's your daily burnt offering. There is the bread, the grain offering. There is the wine offering. Here's some wine offering utensils that have been made by the Temple Institute for use in the third temple. So there's the continual burnt offering. Now let's talk about the blessings and cursings, the outworking of the Mosaic covenant in Leviticus 23. If you want to study this in more depth, Messianic Bible Study in number 132 from REL Ministries is what I'd be recommending. This will give you a good insight into the blessings and cursings of the Mosaic covenant. Highly recommended, REL Ministries. Okay, let's take a look at this. This is Leviticus 26, verses 1 through 46. We start on the blessing side of the ledger. In verses 1 and 2 of chapter 26, obedience is required. God says that obedience is required. As we move to verses 3 and 4, the conditional nature of blessing is laid out. If you obey me, then you'll be blessed. Then in Leviticus 26, 5 through 10, the first four blessings are enumerated: prosperity, power, security, and peace. Those are good blessings for a nation. And then verses 11 through 13, the greatest blessing of all is brought forward: God's very presence walking among the people. Then we move to the curse side of the ledger in Leviticus 26. In verses 14 through 17, if you do not obey me, I will strike you with sickness, harassment, and insecurity. Then in verses 18 through 20, if you still refuse to obey me, well, I'm going to turn the screws down a little tighter. You will experience drought and famine. Drought and the famine that comes from drought. In verses 21 and 22, if you still continue to disobey me, I'm going to come down harder on you. I'm going to send wild animals among you to terrorize you and kill you. And all these curses were experienced before and during the Assyrian invasion. So I've created a little timeline here from left to right, and we'll take a look at how all this fits in time. So from the book of Judges in 1406 BC through the Assyrian invasions in 745 BC, Israel suffered a certain level of sickness, harassment, insecurity, drought, famine, and wild animals during that time. This was discipline of a mild intensity. This is mild intensity. Then we move on to verses 23 through 26. If you still harden your heart against me, I will bring armies upon you. You will experience the horrors of siege, warfare and siege. And this was experienced during the Assyrian and Babylonian invasions. So here's our timeline. Let's move down the timeline. So during the Assyrian and Babylonian invasions, Israel experienced the horrors of siege. The discipline is of increasing intensity. Verses 27 to 33. If you still continue to disobey me, and you'd think we'd get the message by now, if you still choose to disobey me, I will bring upon you devastation, deportation, dispersion, and cannibalism. You'll eat your children. This was experienced during the Babylonian and Roman destructions. So let's move down our timeline. During the Babylonian destructions and Roman destructions, Israel experienced devastation, deportation, dispersion, and cannibalism. And the fullness of judgment is dispersion out of the land. This is the fullness of judgment. And because the fullness of judgment has been reached, now in verses 34 and 35, the state of the land is described as resting and desolate. Resting and desolate. This was experienced after the Babylonian and Roman destructions. So let's move down our timeline to after the Babylonian and Roman destructions. The state of the land is resting and desolate. That was for 70 years after Babylon and for 2,000 years after Rome. Now we have an eyewitness account of this as well through the eyes of Mark Twain in his book Innocents Abroad. You can get this information on Wikipedia. The Innocents Abroad, or The New Pilgrim's Progress, is a travel book by an American author, Mark Twain, published in 1869, which humorously chronicles what Twain called the great pleasure excursion on board the chartered vessel Quaker City. although through Europe and the Holy Land with a group of American travelers in 1867. So he got on this ship, he traveled to Europe and the Holy Land in 1867. It's one of the best-selling of Twain's works during his lifetime and one of the best-selling travel books of all time. So you can still get Innocents Abroad if you'd like to pick it up and read it for yourself. But here's what Mark Twain said. He said, "We traverse some miles of desolate country." Pretty accurate word he used there, didn't he? Desolate country, whose soil is rich enough but is wholly given to weeds, a silent, mournful expanse. A desolation, there's the word again. A desolation is here that not even imagination can grace with the pomp of life and action. We reached Tabor safely. That's Mount Tabor. We never saw a human being on the whole route. The land is deserted. So my question there is, Palestinians, where are the Palestinians? They claim to be in the land from time immemorial. Mark Twain didn't see anybody. The land was deserted. So his eyewitness account throws that criticism out the window. The Palestinians have not lived in the land of Israel from time immemorial. We pressed on toward the goal of our crusade, renowned Jerusalem. The further we went, the hotter the sun got, and more rocky and bare and repulsive and dreary the landscape became. There was hardly a tree or a shrub anywhere. Even the olive tree and the cactus, those fast friends of a worthless soil, had almost deserted the country. No landscape exists that is more tiresome to the eye than that which bounds the approaches to Jerusalem. Jerusalem is mournful, dreary, and lifeless. I would not desire to live there. It is a hopeless, dreary, heartbroken land. Palestine, that's what it was called in Mark Twain's day. Palestine sits in sackcloth and ashes. Palestine sits mourning the Jewish people, mourning the absence of the Jewish people. Things have changed, however. Here is a photograph taken around that time period of Mount Tabor. Remember, this is where Mark Twain, one of the stops on his journey. It's been colorized through watercolor. But there's Mount Tabor in that time period, desolate and deserted. Here's Mount Carmel, where Haifa now exists, desolate and deserted. Here's Jerusalem, living in the midst of desolation and desertion. But like I said, things have changed. Here's the Jezreel Valley today, not desolate and deserted anymore, full of farms and people. Here's Mount Tabor, with villages all around it, no longer desolate and deserted. Haifa, big city, a major port, the major port in Israel. Jerusalem, just thriving with Jewish people, and others, of course, thriving with people. And the Judean hills covered with trees, no longer desolate. And Tel Aviv, new cities are even going up. The land is no longer deserted. It's so packed with Jewish people that rush hour can be a real pain in the neck. Just like on any American city. This is rush hour. All right, so that's the state of the land. Now, in verses 36 through 39, we're at the height of judgment. And so we've looked at the state of the people. Now we look at this, we looked at the state of the land. Now we look at the state of the people. And the state of the people will be fearful, weak, dispersed, and persecuted in verses 36 through 39. And this was experienced after the Roman destruction. It wasn't experienced after Babylon. We thrived in Babylon. Most Jewish people stayed in Babylon. Not true about the Roman destruction. We were kicked out of the land by the Romans. So that's after the destructions. Now, after the Roman destruction, as we go down our timeline, the state of the people is fearful and weak and dispersed and persecuted. And this is explained in detail in Deuteronomy 28, verses 64 through 67. This is quite a look at Jewish experience. Moreover, the Lord will scatter you among all peoples, from one end of the earth to the other end of the earth, and there you shall serve other gods, wood and stone, which you or your fathers have not known. Among these nations you shall find no rest, and there will be no resting place for the sole of your foot. But there the Lord will give you a trembling heart and a failing of eyes, and despair of soul. So your life shall hang in doubt before you, and you will be in dread night and day, and shall have no assurance of your life. In the morning you shall say, woe, would that it be evening. In the evening you will say, would that it were be morning, because of the dread of your heart, which you will dread, and for the sight of your eyes, which you will see. Now I have a book, or I used to have a book, called The Legacy of Israel by Bevan and Singer, and page 119. The Jewish experience is described this way. So for centuries, the Jew lived in a constant state of alarm and often of acute suffering, never knowing but that he might be driven from his home or see it burnt over his head or be butchered by a mob of ruffians or sent wandering with wife and children to find shelter, if he could, and if not, to die of starvation. There's a book in Hebrew with the significant title of Emek HaBacha, the Valley of Weeping. It gives, in a series of annals, the record of all the massacres known to the writer from the earliest times to his own, which is the middle of the 16th century. Every page of that terrible book is, as it were, soaked in blood and tears. And not the least impressive feature of the recital is the way in which the story of horror is told with a dull monotony in which all separate incidents are merged into one long agony of grief. Good summary statement for the last 2,000 years. The fulfillment, the maximum curse or discipline God will bring upon the Jewish people for disobedience. And we have a extra-biblical proof of this. We can get a glimpse of it here. This is a pogrom in Poland in 1936. That's a Jewish building going up in flames. Remember the Warsaw Ghetto, January 1943, Jewish people being killed like crazy in the Holocaust. This is the liberation of Dachau, 1945. Has anything changed today in this area? Well, no. Anti-Semites, neo-Nazis still roam the globe today. However, there's going to be a change eventually. In verses 40 through 46, restoration is promised to the Jewish people, restoration from a worldwide dispersion for kingdom blessings. So this is the Roman destruction. Let's move down the timeline to the Messianic kingdom. There'll be a restoration promised, peace, an end to suffering. We look forward to that. But notice there's a gap in my timeline. What goes into that gap? Unfortunately, the Antichrist destruction fills that gap. The tribulation diaspora, the most severe diaspora Israel will ever experience, is during the tribulation period, when 2/3 of the worldwide Jewish population will be killed, will be murdered by Antichrist. Under Hitler, 1/3 of the worldwide Jewish population was murdered. It'll be twice as bad during the tribulation. So where are we sitting? Where are we today? Well, where we are today is right here between the Roman destruction and the Antichrist destruction. And what are we witnessing is the first worldwide regathering of the Jewish people, modern Israel. This is a fulfillment of prophecy. It is the first worldwide regathering of the Jewish people. You see, 2 worldwide regatherings are predicted for the Jewish people. The first regathering will be in unbelief in preparation for the judgment of the tribulation, Ezekiel 20, 33 through 38, and other verses. And that's exactly what we see in the Holy Land today. Israel's back in the land, but we're in unbelief, and the tribulation judgments are bearing down upon us. The second worldwide regathering will be in faith in preparation for the kingdom blessings, Isaiah 11, 11, and 12. So at the end of the tribulation period, the second worldwide regathering will come, and that will be in preparation for the kingdom. So here's where we sit now. We move down the timeline to after the tribulation, and we enter the Messianic kingdom. We experience kingdom blessings and the second worldwide regathering. All right, we're now at verse 43, and I'm out of time. I'm a little over. So we will pick this up next session at verse 43, and we look at the purpose for the consecration ceremony. All right, thanks for hanging with me for for these extra few minutes. We'll see you next session. We're so glad you have come on board as our students. Thank you very much. Lahithraot. Lahithraot.